Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out the future for smarter buildings. It's great to have you with us today. Our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org in case you're not sure who we are. And also bear in mind that views expressed here in this hour are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's make this as interactive as possible with questions and comments on the Zoom chat. It's always better that way. And lastly, anything that is on this slide deck, you'll be able to see on mondaylive.org right there on the homepage. So this being February, this is the last Monday in February. We've been talking about the AHR Winter Meeting, AHR Expo in Orlando that happened earlier this month. So this will be our last session talking about that. Our agenda on that is that having executed the AHR and the activities going on there, last week we sort of did a bit of a recap and sort of learned about our sort of understanding of our sort of thoughts of what happened in Orlando. So our focus today is sort of just asking the question, what are the paths forward for us as individuals and as a group in terms of how AHR change our thinking and our sort of ways of approaching the future. So where we go next. So that's the intent for today. Just by way of programming note, next month in March, our theme is going to be, are we AI ready? So that's the theme for the whole of March. So I'm sure that's going to be a really interesting month. We've obviously have touched on AI before. So this is touching it again, touching the subject again, especially after AHR and everything that is going on there. So look forward to that. But before that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken for an update from Automated Buildings. Ken.
Thanks, Anto. Okay, the question we were struggling with last Monday was how many people were really there, and the actual official count is 50,807 attendees. So that's a total of everybody, the display people, and the total roll-up of the folks that were there. So that's a big number for Orlando. We now have all of our sessions. We have the videos online. We're really pleased with that. We've started to work through them. We've got the first one done with a TLDR. Nobody's got time to sit and watch all of these things an hour, so we're doing a bit of a summary so you can kind of cruise through them and see which ones you might want to invest in listening to. We were extremely pleased with the reaction we had in Orlando. The amount of attendees we had at our sessions, our education sessions for 2025 was 1,577. So that's a lot of people for us to touch. We had our rooms full quite a bit. Just to give you a reference, in Chicago, we had 1118. And we were pleased with that number. So that's a significant increase. And I think that's probably a good indicator of just what's happening in our industry. Is the industry is a lot more interested in change and what is in fact happening. Actually, the top 3 sessions for us there, I put that on as well, just so you could kind of get an indication of what was going on. The scaling up the next wave, which was our introductory section, which normally is a bit of a sleeper. We had them lined outside the door with 182, and I think the rooms is officially limited at 180. And then the next seller for us was the autonomous building, Tracy's famous program there, and he had 162 folks in the room. And controlling giant heat pumps was a kind of a out of the blue kind of one that Brad wanted to do, and he was absolutely right. As 160 people showed up, and I think what I'm seeing there is that's a crossover about us talking about how what I call heavy metal is going to turn into software, and the OEMs are going to become technology companies. So we're starting to see that walk across the floor. So that's sort of a heads up for everybody, is that's a sort of a new evolving market of interest, I believe, anyway. Uh, Chemo did an amazing job of capturing what was going on in Orlando. Uh, Chemo's now one of our contributing editors. He did some great interviews, and there's a link to that there. Down at the bottom, uh, I he also had. I'm just going to start doing this. Is what's trending well, or what's trending at the top of automated buildings, and his interview of uh, the Indian company 75 degrees was really well. There's definitely some controversy in there. That was well over 2,000, about 2,400 interactions last time I looked. I was surprised with this one, that one of our other contributing editors and I started chatting. And I think this is good to us, or is useful in the fact that when we started the new automated buildings, we had this dream of having the industry have discussion that we could kind of all follow and basically mesh it with social media. And I think we're actually achieving that goal. And anyway, what happened is our other contributing editor, Thomas, went to Orlando for the first time ever. And his reaction is great, because he starts with, I thought I understood what this was all about, and I've been in the business for 30 years, but I didn't really understand until I saw it on. And I think we're kind of all seeing that. And so I wrote a little bit about a rebuttal to it, or not a rebuttal, but a adjunct probably. The beginning of understanding is understanding what we do not know. And I believe that's where we all are in our kind of our life cycle right now, is we're beginning to understand that, oh boy, I thought I knew exactly how all this stuff worked, but there's a lot of things I don't know, and we need to share that. Uh, there's one thing up at the top there by the automated building symbol and the C4SB symbol, the scale. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Anto. I needed that. Uh, this is a conference in California, and it's a lot of Linux people gathering together, open source people, and it's a community. It's an open community, and we're really pleased to help sponsor them and be a sponsor of them, and get listed. I think that's an important piece too, because that's a bit of the crossover that we're all talking about in the industry, is that we're moving from our silos out into the open world. And these are the people that all work in the open world. So I believe some of our members are going to go to that event. Kimon, I think, is pretty committed to go, and is going to try and do some interviews there and sort of get some perspective from the other side of the floor. So that's pretty interesting. So a lot of exciting things happening for automated buildings, and Monday Live, and C4SB, and Scale. And we, of course, love the name of their organization, which has been at it. This is their 22nd event, and they do an event once a year. So they've been at it almost as long as automated buildings. And it's nice that we in fact had the same theme. That wasn't orchestrated. It just sort of happened that we said what's changing is, and that we decided that when we put together our education things, that the big change in the industry is our ability to scale, because we were moving into the cloud and we were using so much the software that other people were using. And then it opened us up to other practitioners coming in to help us do our job. Way down at the bottom, there's a little icon there of a building, and that's actually the summary of last Monday's. There was a couple of things. I think Anto was a bit busy getting it posted, and the girls went snowboarding. So anyway, it just got done late yesterday. So there it is. But there's a good summary of last Monday's Monday Live. Back to you, Anto.
And on that scale conference, I submitted a birds of a feather session, so we'll see where that goes. But the idea there is just to create these birds of a feather sessions in the sort of early evenings to talk about, in this case, buildings. I think I titled it something like Linux is in the buildings, something like that. So we'll see where that goes. Interesting to see that community. Indeed, right. So community board as before, nothing changed there. Any other thoughts from anyone before we move on? Anything new is going on? Not hearing anything. Let us proceed. Okay, so here is the cheese one more time. And this is the final time we're going to have to deal with this cheese, okay? So I do like cheese, but I think I'm getting a little bit bored of cheese. Anyway, so we went to AHR. The cheese has moved thing became the sort of the theme of the whole event, and obviously, as we discussed last week, we all thought it was very successful in terms of setting up the agenda for something different. And so the sort of the question today is, what does that mean to us, for each one of us? So in a minute, I'm going to get rid of this slide, and we're just going to have a chit chat. What are our paths forward in terms of how this changes things? So I might as well start since I have the microphone. I've been going to, and I'm going to stop my share because I don't think we need this anymore. I've been going to AHR since 1992. I think that was the very first one that I went in Anaheim. And I've always thought that AHR Expo is fundamentally a mechanical trade show. Obviously, it is. Most of the stuff there is sort of mechanical equipment and supporting products and services. And so I've always felt, even back in 92, that I was not I was doing something that's different to the most of the people that attend AHR, and I've always felt that way because most of the people are focused on the sort of the mechanical and air movement and everything else. And the sort of, to me, what happened in Orlando is that sort of change. We've seen over the years IT people, IT companies come and go. They sometimes exhibit and speak at AHR and other shows, but they usually don't have a lasting impact because it's kind of different. It's sort of it's just very different approach. And I think we talked about this last week, that it sort of felt like that in terms of IT coming into this space, but it felt different because it was being driven by this group and obviously other people sort of that's actually in the industry. So I'm looking forward to just more of sort of IT kind of conversations at AHR and at shows like that. So to me, that's the big difference for me, is that it sort of it almost sort of flipped the coin about that topic. Obviously, it's always going to be about mechanical stuff and air movement and water movement and all that kind of stuff. But I think the information technology element it's now become really clear that it needs to be part of that industry. So I'm going to shut up and let other people comment on how AHR has changed their sort of thinking about moving forward. Anybody want to chime in?
I'll go forward. So I guess the main question was, where is our buildings ready for AI ready? Yes, they are.
That's next month conversation, but
all right. So I
we're
answered
not
it.
talking about that.
Okay, but I thought that was, I saw that email. I thought that was gonna be today. Sorry about that. Wrong month.
As always, Keith, you're always ahead of your time,
Yeah,
but it's okay.
that's right.
So,
Sure.
I'd actually, I had I checked out the video presentation, and Danielle and I certainly talked about it. It seems like from my discussion with Danielle, that it seemed like people were they were a little bit less fearful of AI, a little bit less fear. There's still some fear in there. Security is always a concern, but that was the impression I got from talking to Danielle, that it seemed like people were less fearful of AI.
Less fearful in terms of,
Adopting it, and I think Chat GPT, of course, had a lot to do with that. Like
right.
Chat AI isn't scary as it was 2 years ago. I remember when Chat GPT first came out, and we were talking about ethical use of it, and it's going to destroy us. And Elon Musk wanted to take over Open AI. I mean, to me, it's like I'm telling you, it's just like Y2K. Like it's just a big thing that everything's going to end at midnight on 1999, December 31st, and like nothing happened. It just, the clocks just rolled over and it wasn't the end of the world. So I mean, I just think that, I think that's where we're getting to. I mean, we're certainly seeing a huge uptick in engagement. I mean, we got like five projects to deploy this week. I mean, worldwide. So I mean, it's really catching since January 2025. It seems like it's really catching on. I don't know if it's the economy or elections over or people just more used to AI, but we've seen just literally a tenfold improvement in engagement from customers and projects in January 2025.
And how did what happened at AHR, specifically the launch of the new C4SB and all of the other stuff associated with that, how did that impact that
I
going
think
forward?
I'd hate to put her on the spot, but I mean, I think I would encourage you to maybe bring Danielle on. So maybe if she could, I think she's a attendee, but she's not a panelist. But since she went there in my stead, I'm only kind of paraphrasing, but I think she got some good insights. I hate to put her on the spot, but if you wouldn't mind maybe bringing Danielle up as a panelist.
So I'll do that, but let's just get somebody else on the panel that's
Yeah.
already here, and then I'll bring Danielle on in a bit.
I think I'll just jump in and say that what Keith is saying relative to AI, I think you can say AI is a proxy for the digitization, the software focus of the industry, as Linux Foundation says, the software defined nature of this industry. As AI is capturing people's attention, it's drawing it to the fact that we are becoming a software defined industry. We're becoming a data defined industry. And AI just happens to be the killer app that is drawing attention to the fact that we need to stop thinking of ourselves as a mechanical industry and thinking of ourselves as a digital industry, similar to what is happening with agriculture or automotive or banking or even the legal profession, or almost every industry now is becoming more software defined. And again, AI just happens to be the thing that's getting all the attention. But I think in every industry trade show, no matter what the industry is, I suspect the same thing could be said as what Anto you said about looking at the kind of rapid change that might be noticeable in our industry from AHR. I think that's very likely to be true of every other industry right now as well, in that they're going from becoming mechanical, or even the legal profession. Geez, y'all know my son's an attorney, and everything about what he does now it's all about the software. Of course, that's his particular area of focus, but every industry is getting this injection of IT, and I don't know that we're behind. I really don't. I think we're probably right in the sweet spot of an industry that's becoming rapidly data and software and AI focused.
I think if you're
There
done,
was
I'd
the
like
other
to
thing
jump.
that I
Sorry.
didn't actually mention it, but when I was going back there back in the to AHR in the 90s, I always felt that from an IT perspective, this industry was behind. But you're right, Rick, that at Orlando, I didn't feel that way at all. I feel that we're actually at the right place.
But you raised a great point, Anto, when you're talking about the IT entrance, of yesteryear. And I assume like you're talking about like HP with their metering and Cisco with the connected real estate and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
yeah, we took it upon ourselves to say we didn't know anything about IT. And so that made a great entree for the real IT people to kind of move into our industry. But I think what they discovered was that, building controls is not, kind of like a not a knuckle dragging activity. Like there's a lot of moving parts. It's more than just putting a router up there and plugging in a wire. Like it's a lot more than that. So yeah, I think that now I agree 20 years later, yeah, we're well prepared. And it's kind of ironic because if you think about it, the earliest networks in buildings were the telephone systems and the BAS system. So we were kind of always been pioneers. Like a lot of my buildings, even in the 80s, that was the first Ethernet wiring in the entire building, that and the telephone system.
Yeah, but
So
we stopped in the 80s.
yeah, I know. We did. We stopped.
That's not a
I could
joke.
just
That's
add to that, I always relate it to the DDC industry because I grew up in that, but the DDC industry, what really changed it was getting getting computers into the hands of the people. And I think what I saw at Orlando from all the video footage I've been looking through is the fact that people are actually using AI, and that answers your question, Keith. Now they're less fearful and they're comfortable with it because they actually do it many simple tasks themselves, and they actually now kind of understand conceptually what it is. The other thing for us that was anybody that has tried to go to that trade show and tried to exist there on Wednesday, I mean, that was usually like the last place in the world you wanted to be. And we were getting like 50 and 60 folks out to sessions on Wednesday, and they were coming enthused. And one of our best Wednesday sessions was basically just on the practical use of how basically AI is just amplifying whatever it is we do.
Yeah,
And whether
good
it's
and bad.
programs, sorry,
Good and bad.
good and bad, yeah. Yeah, okay, good. But the fact that we could have a discussion about that and have people come out and all learn from each other. So in my mind, there was uh, more essence on training or more emphasis on training. The problem with AHR for us is we have, people who install, you know, carry compressors up ladders to put them on the roof, and that's their job. And then we have other people who are basically working in the automation end of it. So there's such a variety of people. It's when you actually create a education session, it's difficult. What do you play to? The 50,000 is the bulk of the people that are involved in the technology, the actual hard metal, as I call it, heavy metal. So, but there is, what we're seeing is a crossover. Also, I think I saw that from the crowds and stuff, definitely it's growing younger, which is, I think, another big step.
So, Jim, do you think that um, it is becoming a lot more IT centric from our focus?
I do. And but I see other trends that trend is superimposed on, which is that, frankly, in terms of HVAC controls and building automation, the market has reached a level of maturity where everyone's products are really quite good. And that has caused the beginning of the collapse of the power of manufacturers in the industry. And that power is moving out to the system integrators in the channel. You know, we've watched Roger explain this phenomena in the UK before, but I really saw it here in spades. The large controls companies matter less and less. It used to be that these large companies were the only ones that had the system integration horsepower to do very large projects. And I think that's no longer the case. So I think that manufacturers are losing power very quickly in this space right now, and the nexus of that power is going out to system integrators in the channel. And those system integrators are getting much more sophisticated and much more than they ever were. You know, I remember Anto introduced me to the British term of screwdriver merchant, which is what he called the channel 30 years ago, right, Anto? Remember you teaching me that term? But the screwdriver merchants have evolved, right, into fairly IT savvy operators. And they've had to because that's the world they live in now. And what I think is exciting about the Linux opportunity is I think that people see that that's going to accelerate that effect, right? That trend is going to be accelerated by Linux. And I don't see anything that stops it. I see the manufacturers as retreating to a position of commodity suppliers who can only try to differentiate themselves by offering some of this new technology. But I think that's what I noticed.
Do you go along with that, Roger?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the interesting things, of course, is that the stands are less and less boxes and things like that. There are a lot more selling concepts, and I think there are companies growing around outside the bigger guys who are growing themselves. These other companies, um, and I think there was one other trend I really noticed was that along with like the whole concept of the IT getting engaged is that the industry is actually attracting investors. We're seeing startups and other companies now getting investments, whether they're good companies, bad companies, doesn't make any difference, but we're seeing lots of, and I noticed speaking to 2 or 3 different companies there that they've received investments. And in fact, I'm seeing that here as well. Small companies as well as medium companies getting investments from out, where you would never have seen that before. I'm talking about VCs as opposed to anything else. So it clearly is becoming attractive outside of our own industry to start investing in it, which I think is, again, is only a positive thing. I think there's still a way to go. I think it's a little bit of a shame that Google kind of stopped where they did. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago where they've been doing their stuff internally, but they have smart people. People from Arabs are joining them and others. And, one would have hoped with what they're doing, they could have at some stage start sharing that or, with what they've been doing and engaging in the industry as well with what they have been doing and what they could potentially offer as well.
What do you think of all of this, Tracy?
I kind of agree with what everyone is saying in terms of the trend. Um, it is kind of interesting to see the level of controls and integration and digitization. Somebody was saying it seemed to be much more prevalent. Nobody is surprised. It's not weird. To Keith's point, everyone is getting more comfortable with AI and talking, about that and how it's applied. Um, I think there's still some fear out there. But one thing that I think was interesting with the Linux announcement is bringing that kind of ecosystem and group and energy and so forth into this space. I think is going to be an accelerator for all of this stuff that we're talking about here. It legitimizes more of what we're doing and what we have been promoting as a group here for sure. And talking with people, you know, I kind of got two reactions. One was, who the heck is Linux? What's that all about? And it was an opportunity to educate people. And the other was, oh wow, that's good. That's going to be good. So it was kind of a bimodal sort of response, you know, talking to people. And I think my biggest takeaway from this is I've kind of felt like this AHR was a bit of a turning point again into a new, you know, we went from pneumatic to DDC, and we went from proprietary and standalone to networks, and I think this is going to be another significant change in how we construct systems and how our industry operates.
So, Steve, you're equipment manufacturer, you're a controls manufacturer, but I think you focus, or is my focus, on being innovative and filling sort of gaps in the market. Do you go along with some of the sort of the trends that we've been talking about here in terms of integrators being more important, other things?
Well, I agree with all of the statements around the trends themselves. My concern has been, and I think it continues to be, where the rubber meets the road, which is actually making connection to the data. Okay. So, and it can get very basic, meaning having someone in the facility that you can talk to who actually knows what's there and knows where and how you can make a connection to the external world. Okay. So, you know, the larger enterprises out in the industry certainly have IT departments, and that's where you land, and that's where you have the discussions. But the small to mid-sized market is still largely a crapshoot, as far as I'm concerned, with regard to knowing what's there and knowing how to put in place remote connectivity. And so, because that's my personal experience. And so the challenge is not just, the challenge is sort of twofold, particularly at the systems integration level, where if we all agree that that's where the sales are being made, because the more and more the business is going to them, then their ability to talk fluently and confidently about how to design a network, an IP-based network, for remote connectivity, be able to walk through a facility with confidence and have the discussions and give the owner confidence that what they're going to be putting in place is going to be secure and protective of the owner's interests outside of building automation. That's my concern. And so I think we have still a long way to go to help on the training side, on the education side, and what I'm looking forward to in all of this is better defining a standard approach for doing this that is repeatable and relatively easy to deploy. Because that's, to me, what's going to make all the difference because it's not about what AI can do. We're seeing it every day. I mean, it just blows my way, some of the things I'm seeing that AI is accomplishing, and everybody wants it. But if you can't get to the data, if it takes you months, or sometimes, because I've had experience where it takes over a year just to get the conversation around how to connect to the building, and that's with the building owner, personnel. It can be very frustrating in that regard. And I think we got a long way to go to really tap what's there. It's not about delivering the final result. I'm convinced we're going to be able to do that. Obviously, Keith has been successful in what he's doing, but I don't think that's the case across the board.
Pete Scanlon just reminded me, we used to hold up an answering machine and say, you know, there's no Ethernet port on an answering machine. And that answering machine is about the same era of most of the building control systems that are still out there running buildings.
Right.
And so you can't get data out of an answering machine, and you can't get data out of most building automation systems. And that, so the, so that's, but that's one of the things that has not as evolved as fast as the software layer, is the, how do you normalize that network layer?
And if you answer yes to the question, is your building control system older than your fax machine?
Yes.
We might have a candidate, right?
Which is unfortunate that, you know, only, as the Johnson Controls, as Kaishi was saying in his presentation, only 5% of buildings in America have a modern building automation system. So that means that 95% of the answers to your question, Tracy, is probably what's a fax machine? You know, and let alone, you know, how do I even start to think about being able to do the stuff that Keith wants to do to buildings?
Well, yeah, but if you think about an industry that went through monumental changes, that telecom industry is like that. And now our phone system at the office is all cloud-based, right? We have virtual phones that follow us and automatically map to our cell phones. We don't need to be tied to our desks at all. All the voicemail gets transcribed and sent to me in a text, you know. That's the kind of stuff that we want to do for buildings, is that exact same thing. So once again, we're at the point where we're not the first industry going through this. In fact, we're way kind of at the tail end of this, and we have lots of models to follow and evidence that this is a good trend here. So
I want to bring in David into this conversation, because David, in a way, is coming at this problem slightly different perspective, because he's not sort of steeped into the control and automation side of things. He's more looking at things from the asset perspective, the owner's perspective. Are you hearing encouraging words from this panel here in terms of building control and automation is going to get a lot more like IT? Is that a good thing? Can you comment?
It's about frickin' time. Is how I would answer it. What's interesting is I was chatting with Jim Lee, and I was like, what was that damn box that Cisco bought?
Yeah, the mediator.
Exactly. And the mediator and Richard Zeta, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember back in 2007 or so when that was happening, I was like, okay, we're ready now. We can do it all. We can integrate everything together. And like, you know, a year later, they quietly killed it all off. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful, Keith. You are a legend. That's amazing. That's one of the boxes.
First driver, the JCI driver on the mediator, and this was literally one of the first 10 mediators that came off the line. That's it.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yes.
So
are you going to go put that back and hold the door open?
It's holding down these papers that I have. I got the fan on my desk, and it's holding down work.
So I was also in the early 2000s working at Morgan Stanley, and the telco guys, when I had gotten there, had just lost their battle, and the firm was switching over to voice over IP. So they no longer had their own network. They no longer, you know, and they're like, we need the resilience, you know, all of the arguments they used and everything. And they fought hard to get it to stop. What's interesting is, like, with building controls, no one cared enough to force this to happen. And what's happening now is it's finally happening, I would argue, evolutionarily or organically. And now that Linux is part of it, it adds a level of enterprise legitimacy that could not be gotten any other way. And I think this will open the door to the growth a lot of us had expected over the last 20 years to finally really start happening.
You know, certainly back in the 80s and late 80s, mid 80s and late early 90s, like, yeah, the telephone system was the first, it was the very first network system, digital system in a building. The automation system was number two. In fact, sometimes we actually rode on top of those, on top of lease lines, et cetera, et cetera. But did you guys know the origin of Echelon? Like where Ken Oshman came from?
Oh,
I
yeah.
do.
Rome.
Yeah, I know that story
The
well.
O in Rome.
Good. Rome. Ken
Rome.
Oshman is the O from Rome.
Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mike
Those are-
Markula was the other partner. He's from Apple. Right.
Right.
Co-founder of Apple.
Yeah. So the
I
telecom
mean,
PAS industry have always been coming up lock and step.
totally,
Technology.
totally. And I was working at ABC here in Chicago at WLS, and the most secure, important room wasn't the television engineering room. It was the room with the PBX in it.
Yep.
And everybody's like, oh, the PBX is in there. And obviously, we're all grotesquely dating ourselves. But when we were talking earlier, don't nod, no, Rick. But
Oh, I'm dating.
you're like it. That was
Where's
in
my
the
picture?
80s.
Where's that paper?
I'd argue the mechanical industry peaked in the 80s and now is finally coming around for another rebirth.
So we need to start a new game show. Is your building smarter than a fifth grader?
No.
No, is the answer to most.
Especially if it's a little
So-
girl, they know everything. So
So you didn't mention AI once, David.
No,
Do you think it's just something that just happens to be happening at the same time?
and
Just
so if you
driving-
paid attention, that's next month's topic.
I know.
And I'm not gonna like give that stuff away now. I need something to say next month. So I'm sorry, I'm not gonna answer that question.
It's good for one comment a month. Don't blow
Exactly.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
one unique thought every month. That's all we ask.
Okay, I consider my hands slapped.
You need to answer Danielle's question though about did cell phones really not exist back then?
Well, Danielle had a great comment saying she'd argue that AI can get data from an answering machine.
Oh, it can now, and that's what we always used to say is like the best way to see what time it is in a particular room or temperature is to point a camera at a thermometer.
Okay, so here's to date all of this. Who was it that just said on the chat, rotary phones? Steve Dodd. So rotary phones existed at the same, back when we were young, as did pneumatic controls. But look at where phone systems are now compared to how far the building automation industries has evolved. Other than going from pneumatic to DDC, there hasn't been anything that I would call a revolutionary change in how we do things in all of that time, compared to like going from a rotary phone to, what we have today. Would you guys agree with that?
100%.
You don't think wireless is a big leap somewhere along the way?
Wireless is still not broadly deployed in big commercial building applications.
No. With phones.
Yeah. Now I'm saying the phones have progressed tremendously, but
Right.
our industry hasn't.
Yeah.
To go from rotary to these, all the innovation that occurred to make all of that happen. Compare that in terms of what we would write as far as a bullet point list of innovation in the building automation industry. Right? We couldn't put our 5 things down. What have you done last week? Right? In the building automation industry.
Oh, geez.
Yeah,
But
it
the
would be
phone
hard
industry
to
was
get
able,
by.
the phone industry was able to move forward because of chip technology, because of miniaturization, chip and radio technology. You know, if you look at those advancements and you say what other industries could affect, what other industries could be affected by those advances? Agriculture, not so much. Law, not so much. Um, like I said, banking, well, some of there, but it's the, you know, these innovations that are either code or chip or operating system related. You know, they went looking for industries where they could have an impact, and obviously telecommunications was one. Not sure that our industry was a great candidate for some of those innovations that have happened over the past 50 years.
But for
But
the wrong
now,
reasons, I would argue, right?
yeah, or we were resistant to having that
That's it.
technology applied to us because we could do
Because
everything
if you
we
think
needed.
about, like, we have a computer here, right? So not only is it wireless and the chip shrinking and all of that, I have something like 600 different apps on my phone.
It's too many.
That's, yeah, it is. I can't find them. So don't even get me started. But that's all about coding and software and adaption. There's an app for everything, right? We in the building industry just are so resistant to change, slow moving. And I mean, arguably, you put something in a building as the building stands for a long time, and there's no need to change it if it ain't broken, right? So it's not like going and getting a new phone every 2 years. So I get that part. That's part of what's causing the slow adoption here. But it just amazes me. You know, you're talking about Ken Oshman. I remember having a conversation with Ken and Mike Markula about the very origin of the thought of LawnWorks. And it was over lunchtime in the conversation. They're doing a whiteboard exercise and said, what would the world look like if a computer cost 50 cents or 25 cents? That was the opening statement of what started LawnWorks, right? Well, they need to have processing power. You'd need to be able to program it. It would have to communicate, you know, and if everything cost 50 cents, 25 cents, you could put a computer on every light bulb and every light switch and so on and so forth. That was in the 1980s.
Tracy, what was the lowest price that a neuron chip ever sold for?
You could get some of the 3120s in volume between 10 and $20.
So they missed the mark by an order of magnitude for where they
No,
needed to be,
yep,
right?
and
And that's
that
one of
was
the reasons that it didn't fly. And I want to point this out with telecom also. Scale. We've talked, or I've complained about this to this board many times before, is that we don't operate at the scale in terms of hardware that these other industries do. And
yeah.
when you're building cell phones a jillion at a time, you can get very sophisticated technology and beat the price down to those price points. But our industry is not big enough to enjoy those hardware economies of scale yet. However, we do see processors and Wi-Fi going into light bulbs now, right? So on consumer related vectors, we are seeing the beginnings of that, right?
I
Yeah,
think
we
you're
like
right.
to think we're ahead in the commercial buildings, but I think the consumer level, consumer grade stuff is way ahead technology wise.
Well,
Well, because it can tolerate the volume.
Right.
Because of
Right.
volume. But I think, Jim, is what you're saying also is that, you know, we're hardware dependent still. You know, we can do as much software as you like, but without, you know, the lower cost hardware platforms at the edge and everywhere else, we're still not going to actually perhaps generate some of the data that Steve was on about that we need, because that's where it sits. And so getting down to that hardware level and making it affordable is still really important. And none of the manufacturers, the big guys, are actually investing in that. They're still happily plodding along with their controllers. But I think we got to get down to that level so that
Roger,
we can actually, you know, start providing data at the lowest level.
Roger, you nailed it. So I remember one of the things that I learned about scale and enterprise scaling was at Bank of America. This is back when I was a tech and an engineer at the B of A project back in 1989. Okay, I walked into this room on the 7th floor and it was the ATM communication comm room. So you know how B of A, having an ATM machine, like that's relatively new. So in the late 70s and stuff, not every bank had an ATM. That was a competitive advantage and they went to all the modem providers and they looked at modem pools and they couldn't even find anybody that could scale to that level of reliability. And so they built their own modem. Bank of America built their own modem, and it was quite simple. This is counterintuitive, but they literally had one little postage size stamp modem for every single ATM. It was a 1-to-1 ratio because they needed massive concurrency. And so you go walk in this room and there's this tech that would just walk around and look for the little red fault light. And he would just pick up the new modem, pull the old one out, plug it back in and had the address. And that's how they did their maintenance. This poor modem changing guy, like that was his full-time job. And he would just walk around changing out. But you see the massive horizontal scale. That's where I learned about scale. And also, to your point, the cost of manufacturing, that type of modem, it didn't exist. So B of A saw it as much of a competitive advantage to build their own freaking modem.
So there's another aspect, and Jim points this out, is that buying behavior has not changed amongst our customer base. And I want to, coming back to telecom, remember when your company wouldn't let you use your cell phone inside the walls of the company? Okay, so corporations have been resistant to to any new technology coming in and disrupting the way they do business. And it's crazy because we as humans, we want to have just as many apps, maybe not 600, for how we work as how we play. And the corporations, the institutions that we're trying to sell to or date or whatever, but the institutions that we sell to are restricting the influx of new technology, but that's changing as well. And that's where Keith's point about the ATMs had to be invented and the scale was there. There's other apps that people are dying to be able to, to be able to come up with. So our building control market may be stale, but there's a ton of other market that is somewhat related that we can sell into for other apps that have just not been possible because the damn modem was too expensive or didn't work or whatever. And now we've got new technology for solving that hardware side. Anyway, I'm trying to connect some dots to say that the innovation has not yet been allowed to happen in a lot of our customer base.
And I'm going to connect the dot and get on my usual soapbox that this is where scale, and it's not just the customer, but it's the interaction between the customer and the vendor, or once again, our procurement system, that prevents most of this technology from happening, right? And ask yourself, in what other industry does somebody have to reduce what they're buying in terms of new technology to a document that can be competitively bid amongst 3 different players? Bank of America didn't say that when they were building those modems. They said, here's a business opportunity for us to crush in ATMs. We're going to do it. They didn't say, oh, we got to have 3 bids and we want to make sure it's a commodity before we get in it, right? So, I mean, that constant de-risking is basically in procurement forms paralysis around adoption of new technologies. But that's what this industry suffers from.
And Jim, I would argue that is not de-risking at all. You're actually introducing tons of risk by having 3 different bidders. Right. And if you go to any university or any enterprise corporation, they don't ask for 3 bidders for their switchgear for their IP network. No, they have a standard across the firm. No one fights that. And it's like, why this isn't done with control systems is beyond me.
Well,
yeah,
one
it makes it way riskier.
Yeah, I agree
from
with
my
you,
experience.
but the only difference I'll point out between the IT things we've talked about, telecom and control systems, is the control systems need to last longer, right? So there's a delta in time constant. If we look at the time constant for IT, it's really 3 to 5 years. You look at the and really telecom runs at that same pace
So
almost.
you're exactly correct, but here's an interesting nugget is that the computer and IT stuff depreciate at 1 to 3 years and sometimes 5 years, right?
Hmm.
You could totally make the same argument for DVC boxes because it's technology.
Yeah, but in our industry, the financial bean counters have coupled it to mechanical systems, which is on a 20-year curve, right?
And
So we
that's
get
their
penalized
mistake
right
because they
away,
could have
right?
depreciated the whole thing 17 years ago or whatever it was.
We
Maybe
need
They had
that's-
better lobbyists.
categorized that part differently.
We need
Maybe-
better lobbyists for that.
Well, that's why
No,
I
we
think
don't. Well, I shouldn't have even said that on the call. I should have just stayed on mute.
No, I think that what it says is C4SB needs to get us in front of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and we need to educate their trade group as to how to solve the world's climate and energy crisis by changing their procedures.
We might be actually cool in that room.
Don't get your hopes up.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So there you go, a task for you, Rick.
Me and
I think
account-
that's a perfect thing to close on, Anto.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this has
Linux
been a really,
Foundation can help us get in front of the bean counters.
Well,
That's
that's funny
kinda
because there
weird.
is there's a whole section of Linux that is focused on the finance and accounting and banking. But again, that's where a lot of the accepted practices and standards that we're going to be adopting are going to be welcome. We'll work on the lobbying part, okay?
So
Okay.
I'll just
And-
add one other comment to build on what I was talking about earlier, which is it's a plug for the IBB. I want to be able to walk into the building and ask the question, show me your IBB. And if the IBB is done the way we're talking about, I got my answer. I know where to put my app. I know where the data lives. I know how to access the data. I'm ready to go, right? I've simplified the answer to getting connectivity to any building. Yes, there should be a range of IBBs in terms of price point and sophistication, but man, if we could really standardize as an industry on a device that is your point of connection for all your applications and do what we've been talking about doing, all of a sudden everybody starts deploying in a common way. Because right now it's a crapshoot, as you know.
So I think we should wrap on that. I think that's a good way to sum up our conversation in a very specific way. So thank you for that, Steve. Thanks everyone else.
Thank
And
you.
we'll get a video up next couple of days. Otherwise, hope everybody has a good week, and we'll see each other next week, next Monday.
All right.
Bye.
Sounds
all.
good, guys.
Bye-bye. all.
Yeah,
Bye,
I'll
guys.
let it- Bye.